Good evening, everybody. My name is Melvi, coming to you live from Conscious Consumer Network headquarters here in The Hague. It is great to be with you again this Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. GMT, 8 p.m. here in Central Europe, and a big welcome to you wherever you may be tuning in from. It sure has been an interesting few weeks on the research front, so just to let you all know, we are doing a Dragonology Season 3, Episode 8. Yes, we are more than halfway through Season 3 of Dragonology, and we thought we'd do a bit of a recapping for around this time of year, which is one of the most interesting times of the year with regards to the symbolism that plays out in Dragonology. But of course, before we get into all the rituals of April, we're going to be defining the layers. And this is a very interesting exercise simply because to understand the vast scope of Dragonology, one needs to grasp the multi-layered symbolic allegories that make up the draconian construct. Learning how all various symbolic representations fit together, you begin to learn the occult rules of grammar making up the hidden language of the dragon. So we obviously talk a lot about various symbolism, and I sometimes reference term like this is a primary symbol, or this is, a very important dragon root word, or there are certain levels and layers of symbols which lead on to other symbols, which are perhaps more secondary or allegorical through less obvious connections. But there's simple ways in which you can learn how this all fits together, and that's understanding where the various layers fit and how they then lead on to the other allegories. So I've done my best to try to put this into some sort of format or structure that kind of fits for people on the basis of what we have been learning through our studies into Dragonology. And of course, the purpose of Dragonology is that it unschools us from our language-based programming, okay? Our programming is language-based, and that is how they've managed to put spells on us, okay? And through an examination of the multi-layered symbolic construct that is interwoven into the fabric of our reality through language and art and architecture and sport and many other cultural aspects. And when you start to look into these cultural aspects, you begin to understand how the symbolic allegories are built up and how the layers sort of unfold into each other. So just to do a little recap, and I'm sure for those of you who have been following along, this will be perfectly understandable. But for those of you who perhaps might be new to Dragonology, I'd like to suggest you please go back and watch Season 1 and 2, and of course the first 7 episodes of Season 3. It'll definitely give you a greater context for what I'm saying and what I'm explaining. Otherwise, a lot of this will just look like I've grouped words and concepts together and there's kind of no connection. But if you understand how we have decoded the language and the symbolic aspects into its various parts, you will understand pretty much how all of this now fits together. So tonight I'm starting obviously with primary symbols of the dragon. And for me, we always have to go back to the origins, the starting point. And of course, the word origin being a very key dragon word, because or and jin, 2 key dragon root words, make up the very interesting word origin, which talks about humanity's beginnings. And that really normally starts in all cultural mythologies where you have the serpentine deities turning up with a creational myth. And you have very key things which turn up no matter which cultural mythology you go to, and that is the existence of some kind of gods or deities, angels and devils, and that these gods and deities, which were generally serpent-like or dragon-like in nature, were somehow involved with the creation of humanity or the earth. But also these dragons are hidden behind various other symbols, such as, when you look up, the sun, the moon, and the stars, as well as when you look down, the earth, the water, but also the air and fire, then, of course, the spirit, and very interesting because the word spirit has 2 very key dragon roots words in it, S-P-I and R-I-T, R-I-T being the root of ritual. So that you begin to understand how all the various things interlink into each other once you understand the etymological and symbolic aspects of Dragonology. And then, of course, we've spoken about how Dragonology ties into the cycle of life, particularly when you start to look at the ritual aspects of things. We're going to go a bit into that tonight. We're talking about the cycle of the sun and the festivals that happen around April, which really had to do with fertility festivals because, of course, it's spring. And then, of course, the whole death, birth, rebirth, resurrection thing, which comes in with so many different deities throughout Egyptian mythology, throughout Hindu mythology, and in fact, even in Christianity, you have the resurrection deity being, of course, Jesus. And this carries on through every cultural mythology where you find serpents or dragons turning up as part of the rhetoric. And then we start to move more into what we call the serpentine bloodlines, not really the gods, but those who were ordained by the gods by divine rule to rule over humanity, the royalty, the pharaohs of the past, the emperors, sultans, popes, and priests. And we, of course, have spoke a lot about the priests of Atlantis, such as Thoth and Oannes, and various people that came out of the flood to bring order to people of the world straight after the floods happened. Of course, we talked about the Great Floods, and we've been covering that off in great detail, going into the oldest civilizations on Earth in previous Dragonology. So do go check that out, because it's all very relevant and it all ties into each other. It obviously provides the context for which we understand how all this fits in. So let's look at animal symbols of the dragon. And this is interesting because the Chinese say that all the animals of the zodiac, the 11 animals that we commonly know, that we could probably find in day-to-day life, all make up the dragon. The dragon has a part of every single one of those animals, the other 11 animals, and that's what the dragon's made of, because the dragon is supposedly the only animal on the Shengzhou, being the Chinese zodiac. It is the only animal that we do not recognize as a common everyday animal, and is generally relegated to the realms of semi-dismissive mythology when, you know, as we've discussed, there's probably some reality to all this dragon symbolism and serpentine symbolism, and particularly because it's so interwoven into every aspect of our life, through our language and through our cultural practices. But the interesting thing is that there are a number of key animals which make up snake and, I beg your pardon, which make up dragon symbolism. And of course, the most primary one being the snake or the serpent, okay? In the book of Revelations, it talks about the dragon being a great serpent, the same deity, the same being. The dragon and the serpent are one and the same. So David Icke references them as the reptilians, okay? Because obviously serpents and crocodiles and lizards are of the reptile family. But like, for example, Sobek in Egyptian mythology, you have the crocodile being represented as this like reptilian entity. But quite commonly, the animal migrates in form to being a bird that of some sort. And there's various bird depictions, very key ones of gods. We're going to cover some of them off tonight. But it's interesting to notice that the bird symbolism is very key with the whole dragon and serpentine deities. We think about South America, where Quetzalcoatl was referenced as the feathered serpent or winged serpent, winged like a bird. So the wing aspect is very important, but we also deal with another symbol which is associated with Easter and the bird, also very important. But we see the bird as a god or deity being represented as a swan, as a peregrine, as is the case with the god Horus, eagles, ibis, as is the case with Thoth, dove, as is the case with the Holy Spirit, and of course the cockerel, as is often the case with the basilisk. And then there are the dog deities. Of course, the shape-shifting werewolf is a good example of, you know, many themes there, the shape-shifting theme, but the therianthropic theme, being able to change from one shape to another. But there's many dog deities such as Anubis, which ties into Egyptian mythology as well, which is very important. And then the bull, the cow, and the calf have been worshipped from Judaic history to in various aspects. For example, the goddess Hathor is often known in her calf or cow or bull aspect, which is where the horns come from. And there's often been a case of the sacrifice of the golden calf or worship of the golden calf or sacrificing of the bull, as is the case of Mithra, who kills the bull. Often you'll find that that which represents a dragon can also be used as a symbolic sacrificial votive, which we will again talk about tonight. And you'll find that with the goat and the ram. The goats and the ram, the sacrificial lamb. Of course, at Eid in the Muslim culture, they sacrifice a goat. Another aspect, of course, of the dragon, we spoke a lot about Ganesha, the elephant god of Hindu mythology, and why the elephant god of Hindu mythology is representative of the dragon. And, of course, the final one being the fish, which, of course, should be no surprise when you start looking at things like the wyvern, mermaids, Melusine, and of course the fact that dragon scales and fish scales kind of match up together. But the fish is often commonly a representation of the dragon or a dragon symbol. So with the animals kind of covered off, I'm sure those of you who've watched previous Dragonologies will have seen various examples of all of these. We will cover a few of them tonight, however. Here we go into some of the more abstract symbols of the dragon, if you want to call it that, because these are symbols that kind of need a much deeper explanation for people to understand how they're associated with the dragon. And again, you have to really kind of go through the whole understanding of the Dragonology backlog of information to really conscientize and glock this fundamentally as to how all these things tie in. Of course, we've already mentioned the shape-shifting aspect, which has been made very clear to us by people like David Icke, but also, with regards to beings that are associated with the dragon, such as werewolves, they shapeshift or they metamorphose. The dragon root word, or of course, being a metamorphosis. And the therianthropy, the THE, the word of the Greek word for God, and anthropy referring to the ability to change shape. And then, of course, the ability to appear and disappear. Okay, which is often referenced in Christian literature as the theophany. There's a Saint Theophania, which turns up in Christian mythology, but a theophany of God means the appearance or the disappearance of God, almost like they turn into a spirit or a vapor or a cloud. And all of these elements are linked to dragon symbolism. And of course, as we've already mentioned, that which is associated with the birds being the wings and the feathers, the plumage, which of course can also be a crown on the head that like kings wear, which again can be interpreted in the artworks, Christianic artworks, the sort of more holy crown or the halo depicting a holy person, which can also surround the whole body, such as the aureola, which indicates illumination or enlightenment. And of course, the ability to read our letters, our language, and all of that is said to have come from the dragons. And from light, we get the word lit, literate, and of course, language has the word A-N-G for angel, A-N-G-U, as in angui. Angui is the Latin word for serpent, a Latin word for serpent. Then, of course, the word rite has the R-I-T root of ritual, because writing is a ritual taught by the gods. And then the boat symbolism, or the carriage. Often you see these Greek pictures with carriages being pulled by winged serpents. And that the carriage then turned into the car, which is why so many cars use occult symbols as their logos. And, of course, spaceships, which is these sky boats, which you kind of see depicted in Egyptian mythology. But also there's some very interesting depictions of spaceships turning up in medieval paintings, which seem to be like out of place. But those themes are typically what are associated with the dragon, serpentine, angelic deity bloodlines, and they come up very commonly again and again. So dragon symbols in architecture, I've been through this quite a lot, and just if you want to see actual physical examples of these in pictures, do feel free to go and download a copy of my book, Dragonology, Book 1, Spellbreaker, from the website dragonology.info, and it gives many illustrations of what I'm talking about, and it breaks down the etymology more clearly. But there's certain things that turn up again and again and again in architecture, in structures, which are in fact encoding the dragon vibration or dragon energy into the buildings. Things such as arches and columns, of course the word column having the kolu dragon root word. Domes as well, a very common theme with regards to dragon architecture. Glass, we go into that when we talk about Glastonbury and the glass bloodline. Squares and right angles, of course we have the right angle turning up on the Masonic logo. Tessellated tiles, that's an obvious one for people who understand occult symbolism. The obelisk, of course, another obvious one. And then spires and minarets, not unlike obelisks, of course, found on temples of worship. Then we got the grouping of symbols that fall under what I consider to be fertility ritual symbols of the dragon, because of course everything is linked to cycles of the sun. It all comes down to that when it comes down to ritual. And you need to consider that there's many things that are associated with fertility symbols. Okay, of course, the very obvious being the depiction of sex, for one. But of course, fruit. We plant in spring and then harvest our fruit, and they grow into orchards, which of course has the common dragon root word or, just like the word orange, which has the root word or and the beginning of the root word of angel. So that's an interesting one. Orange. Apple, pear, grape, peach, all of these are rooted in dragon etymology. And of course flowers, flora, the O-R root word, where you find orchid, okay, and I beg your pardon, orchid, which is a dragon symbol, just like the rose is also a dragon symbol, just like the lily is also a dragon symbol. These flowers all have deeper symbolic allegory. And of course, when you get to agriculture and you start finding things like wheat sheaths turning up in deities' hands because they are an agrarian god, worship with the seasons and the cycles of the sun. And of course, you find the pumpkin turning up, for example, around Halloween, because that's a harvest time ritual. And then, of course, fertility rituals, extended allegories and themes being the sword and the chalice, which would represent the penis being the phallus or the vagina, of course, being the chalice. And in rituals, the sword is inserted into the chalice as a representation of a sexual act. And this brings us on to, of course, the Holy Grail, which turns up in just about all elements of dragonology. For example, the story of Arthur. Arthur was known as Arthur Pendragon. The story of Jesus, we won't go into that more, but the Holy Grail turns up in some very, very interesting places pertaining to dragonology. Of course, all implements of war, such as swords, bows, arrows, all tie into dragonology, because it was, of course, the dragons and the gods who got man to fight wars. Man fights wars against gods, not man, but we now fight it against each other, brother on brother, instead of realizing who the real enemy is. And of course, the egg and the phallus, the egg being the feminine aspect and the phallus, or the sperm, being the male-female aspect, you do have that duality which is played out, the yin, the yang, good, bad, good and evil, God and devil, the feminine of the egg, and of course the semen or the phallus, which is the male aspect. All of these, of course, tie very heavily into dragonology. Now we go on to a little bit of the egg symbolism, because of course it is the egg season, and it's interesting to notice. I did some Googling on egg symbolism, and I found some really great depictions which tie in some very interesting themes, which we're going to explore a little bit more. In this particular reference, we have the sacred egg of Heliopolis, which is depicted with a moon. And as we've spoken about, the sun and the moon and the stars, again, interesting symbols of the dragon. And then Typhon's egg, which in this particular depiction is an egg with a serpent wrapped around it. This is from Bryant's mythology. Okay, Typhon's egg. Now, if you look at what Typhon looked like, he was supposed to be one of the most feared of all the Greek gods. So here we got what Typhon is depicted as in this lovely engraving. In the back, you've got harpies with look serpent tails. And here you've got the two legs that turn around into sort of serpent-like tails, and he's all scaled, and we've got serpents for fingers. So that's Typhon, pretty scary. There's serpents crawling all over his body. So that's clearly indicating dragon origins, because the serpent symbolism is, of course, dragon symbolism. And here's another depiction of Typhon with some very interesting features in this one, which are really worthwhile pointing out. This is a painting on one of these beautiful old Greek urns, or craters as they were called. Here you can see Typhon depicted with very clear serpent legs, very distinguishable, but also with wings, as we've already spoken about, a clear symbol of the dragon. And we notice he has a Phrygian cap. Ooh, very interesting. Okay, so that's Typhon. As you said, Typhon, this is Typhon's egg. And it's depicted here with a serpent wrapped around it. And this is how Typhon is depicted, the Greek god, supposedly the equivalent to the Greek devil or Greek Satan, the most feared of all the gods. And this symbol of the egg wrapped in a serpent is also commonly referenced as an Orphic egg, all right, as we've already spoken about. This is a depiction from Jacob Bryant's mythology, a depiction from 1774. So these are ancient occult symbols that were obviously known to certain circles and made it into various publications. The egg in ancient Greek Orphic traditions is the cosmic egg from which hatched the primordial hermaphroditic deity known as Phanes, also known as Protagonist, known the gon, as in dragon. Look at it, it's over there. And of course, Protagonist is variously equated with the gods Zeus, Pan, Metis, Eros, and various others, who in turn, and of course, Protagonist or Phanes created the other gods, the lesser gods, the gods that came underneath them. And of course, the Orphic egg is commonly depicted with a serpent wrapped around it, the word Orph being a dragon root word. Orph. Of course, the O-R, a dragon root word, but the PH next to it, also very key. And just a little reminder of what Phanes looks like, if anybody has forgotten. We commonly reference Phanes very often in Dragonology. And you will notice, as we've already discussed, Phanes is born out of the cosmic egg. You can see the egg at the top and the egg over here. And the Phanes is usually depicted with cloven hooves. Interesting to notice that. With a serpent wrapped around them. And, of course, winged, which is very common for these deities. The cosmic egg is also sometimes depicted like this, with the zodiac in it. These are all symbols of the zodiac in this cosmic egg. And the aureola as well, which is an aura that goes all around, is also a variant of the cosmic egg. This says illustrator unknown, but it's not. It's from Brian's Encyclopedia of Mythology from the 18th century. But this, we do know, is a painting by Salvador Dali. And it's interesting because Salvador Dali was most certainly an initiated artist when you start to look at the symbolism in some of his artworks, however so realistic they might be. But the Orphic egg symbolism is commonly used and hidden in pictures in some very interesting places, and we'll go into that a bit more. As you said, eggs, of course, very common and very understandable that they are a fertility symbol, because when you talk about something being fertile, you talk about fertile eggs. If an egg is not fertile, it cannot produce offspring, okay? And again, lovely depiction here, and as you said, the duality of this comes up with the good and the evil. And it says here, the two principles of Persia symbolized by two serpents contending for the mundane egg. We'll get onto the mundane egg a bit. Lovely artwork here depicting the mundane egg, or the Orphic egg, cosmic egg. Again, I love this. Another expression of the cosmic egg from which all creation was birthed, or the mundane egg, a symbol of creation. And this comes up in many different religions and mythologies across the world in all different expressions. And the eggs, of course, apart from being esoteric symbol, come from birds generally. They do come from other creatures as well, but here's generally what natural bird eggs look like, a nice little collection of them, and they truly are beautiful things to behold with every shape, color, and description. But birds are not the only creatures that lay eggs. So too do serpents, which is again the other connection between the bird and the serpent. As we said, birds in various forms have long since been representations of the dragon bloodline. But one of the key things that connects them is they are both hatched from eggs, and the egg symbolism is very key when we're dealing with dragonology. And here we go into a little bit more of how the egg symbolism is extrapolated to indicate dragons, because when you start looking into mythology, and I must just say that there is a very long and sad list of rape that goes on in mythologies, in Greek mythology and Roman mythology and whatnot. And sometimes rape is labeled under the word abduction. So, for example, you have the mythology of the abduction of Granny Mead, but it's also known as the rape of Granny Mead. And in this particular story, it's actually Leda who was raped by the swan. And this is images of Leda and the swan, and this would obviously be Leda's offspring who are hatching from eggs because, of course, the offspring are from the swan. And human beings don't hatch from eggs. So what this is clearly saying is this is non-human offspring. This is dragon bloodlines, okay? So the eggs, again, very key symbol of the dragon. And very interesting to note is this theme of Leda and the swan, and it has been repeated so many times by so many grandmasters. Please do go Google and let me see how many versions there are of this particular theme of Leda and the swan. And in this particular story, the swan actually is the god Zeus, the Greek god Zeus, who has transformed into his bird-like aspect. But Zeus is not only known in the swan form, as I shall go on to explain. But I just want to point out the eggs are very symbolically significant here, because here as they are, in this context, symbolic of the serpent or dragon bloodline, okay? Because as we've already said, we've already spoken about, birds and serpents both hatch from eggs. And there's, as I've already said, various depictions of Zeus as a swan, and then the theme of the rape of Leda being played out by various artists and in various ways, very sexually explicit. Of course, I do want to point out that Zeus comes in other bird aspects. Here in The Rape of Granny Mead by Rembrandt, you can see Granny Mead's barely an infant, which is rather disturbing because Zeus rapes Granny Mead. And Zeus here is being depicted as an eagle. But in other paintings, for those who follow dragonology, you'll know I referenced this particular painting by, I forgot who it is, but Giovanni Romano. It's a 16th century depiction of the rape of Olympia, or the seduction of Olympia. There's another word that replaces rape, the seduction of Olympia. But Olympia doesn't look terribly willing in this participatory act. It very much does look like it's a rape scenario, but you can see clearly Zeus is depicted here with serpent legs, okay? But in the background, Zeus is also got his counterpart, which is the eagle, because Zeus is commonly depicted, as we've already said, in a bird-like aspect, either as a swan or an eagle. And then, of course, there's the Egyptian bird gods, which are probably some of the most famous, and we've covered these off intensively. Of course, Horus, the OR dragon root word, and commonly depicted as a peregrine falcon. The peregrine falcon is very distinctive for that black marking that curves back behind his eye. That's how you know it's a peregrine falcon. Of course, the P-E-R-E is a dragon root word, peri. And of course, so is the root word grin, also a dragon root word. And then, of course, Thoth the original protagonist, the original primordial god of creation in ancient Greek, ancient Egyptian mythology, I beg your pardon, is depicted as an ibis. All right, but notice they both have this kind of headdress which comes sort of back here where these flaps that come down, commonly depicted with a similar headdress going on. Interesting. And of course, the egg symbolism turns up very commonly, apart from on our breakfast table, in modern day culture, particularly if you've grown up in sort of the Western culture, you'd be familiar with something like Easter, which is what I call the egg festival. It really is, because this is the time of year when you get little kids painting different colored eggs and munching on chocolate eggs, and you see the most amazing displays of eggs in shop windows and confectionery stores. And living here in Holland, trust me, it's really difficult to stay away because they all look so good. But it is really an interesting time of year because the word Easter actually has a much deeper root. Here, Easter, we illustrate, is etymologically cognizant with the word Ishtar, okay? Now, Ishtar is the Babylonian mother goddess figure, and this is a depiction of Ishtar from the Burney relief. Interesting things to notice here, bird-like feet, okay, bird-like feet, claws, very much distinctly bird feet, wings, again, the winged deity, and of course, she's got birds on either side of her, this time owls. Owls are also symbols that are very commonly associated with the dragon. And also the extended allegory of owls being wise. Then, of course, you have that saying, wise as serpents, and it just keeps going on and on. It all goes around in circles. But in this particular context, what is important here is the goddess Ishtar is actually where the whole word Easter originates, and the migration comes through Ostara, okay, or Ostara or Ustra, who is a Germanic goddess who is celebrated by the festivals that take place around Easter. April was known as Ostara Mana in ancient Anglo-Saxon cultures, old pagan Anglo-Saxon cultures. So they used to hold a festival, many feasts were held in Ostara's honor, but eventually the whole practice and celebration of the goddess, mother goddess figure, as we can see, she was a mother goddess, Ishtar in Babylonian culture, Anglo-Saxon culture to Ostara, and then of course the whole thing was replaced by the Christian Paschal month, which is of course a celebration of the resurrection of Jesus, and we've already spoken about the resurrection, death, birth cycle. And this is a 19th century depiction of Ostara, woodcut. And then the Christian traditions are, as we can see, just by how this has evolved, how Easter has evolved out of the celebration of Ishtar and Ostara, which were all pagan festivals, all right? And as you've seen, it's evolved very much into a Christian festival, but all Christian traditions are based on pagan rituals, and that's a fact. And most hardcore Christians really get upset when you say this to them. Most of your rituals are based on paganism, and in fact, even if you're not like celebrating Christmas, most people, even if they're not, I beg your pardon, even if you're not a practicing Christian, you don't go to church, and you're just kind of neutral in the whole thing. Most people do. They practice some kind of Christmas ritual, and they do practice some kind of Easter ritual. And even if you don't want to practice it, the thing is that in Western cultures, this is the time of year when kids are given school holidays. So we're made to feel that it's a time of year which has some kind of significance and should be acknowledged. And I will go into whether or not we should be acknowledging these rituals. But the interesting thing is that most people don't understand the roots of these rituals and that they all have pagan origins, okay? And that's okay, but you have to know what it is you're participating in. Don't just blindly go along with, yeah, let's go and have an Easter feast and eat eggs and whatever else without knowing the origins and what it is you're doing and where these symbols are rooted. Because if you actually understand where they're rooted, you might think twice about wanting to participate in them. We'll get into that a bit more. But really what you're looking at here is these seasonal fertility rituals absolutely correspond with the movements of the sun, which is why for me the sun as we spoke about at the very beginning, is one of the primary dragon root symbols from which many other symbols evolve. Of course, the sun is then represented through sun god allegories, such as Horus is a sun god, Jesus was a sun god, and of course the cross that we use in Christianity has evolved out of this sun god allegory, the symbol of the sun. So many of the rituals, such as spring, which equinox has just happened, and we have Easter coming up, happens at a specific time of year. Solstice and the equinox lines are marked out on the zodiac, which of course depicts the journey of the sun through the course of the year across the sky. And this is where we are now. We're on this particular line, which is the spring equinox, which is when we celebrate Ostara Ishtar, Easter, or whatever you want to call it. And it's interesting to look at how the whole pagan ritual cycle plays out, because now, of course, Easter, and I just want to go back here, when we have the winter solstice, this is spring, and we're going to have summer solstice still, which is the middle of June. Then we have autumn equinox, and winter solstice is round about when Christmas happens. So you have two distinctive Christianic rituals which happen at very distinctive points that correspond with the lines of the Christian cross, according to the sun's travels around the sky, if you're looking at this particular zodiacal depiction, which is the oldest conceptual image known to man. Again, look at the pagan cycle. This is the 8-pointed acknowledgement of various pagan traditions, which again tie into the cycle of the sun, all right? All around the course of the year, you can see this is all tying into various cycles of the sun. Most rituals associated with Wicca and paganism are associated to fertility rituals and are linked to the seasons and the movements of the sun. Solstice and equinox are key times for rituals and various activities involving sacrifice. Now, this is where we get onto, is that most rituals on the deeper occult levels, we think, let's celebrate Easter, let's celebrate Christmas, but those who understand what these significant times of year are really all about take it to the extreme. They really use the energetics of this time of year for maximizing and benefiting through acts of ritual sacrifice. Before I go there, I just want to talk a little bit more about the egg symbolism again as a symbol, which is interesting because the egg has also been referenced as a symbol of the soul. And I have referenced this film previously in Dragonology. If you've not seen it, do go back and watch this. It's a 1980s film, very nicely done for an old film, like for a film that's really that old, 30 years old. And this film has Robert De Niro and Mickey Rourke in it. But what was interesting to notice is that Robert De Niro, who plays Lucifer, eats this egg and says, the egg, did you know the egg is the symbol of the soul? He eats it like he's the soul eater. The symbolism in this is amazing. But basically this guy, Harry Angel, sells his soul to the devil for fame, and the devil has come back to collect his soul and symbolically eats the egg in terms of saying, I'm here to take your soul and imbibe your soul. Amazing symbolism, really worth watching one of these old films. When you go back and you watch these old films, you realize that they've been onto this stuff for so much longer than we care to acknowledge. Anyway, the whole concept of the egg tradition comes up at Easter time in the form of the adorned or decorated egg. Now, we've spoken about adornment and decoration in Dragonology previously, and the whole concept of adorning and ritual decoration as we decorate the Christmas tree. We wrap our Christmas presents and we decorate them with bows. Just like at Halloween, we decorate ourselves. We put makeup on and get dressed up in costume. Ritual adornment and decoration is part of the whole ritual process that goes along with Dragonology. Okay, so adorning the egg is just another extension of that. So it's a ritual practice with the symbolic votive, which is the egg. Okay, ritual practice of adornment, which is why we decorate the eggs, why we color our Easter eggs, why we put all pretty things on them, and why we buy all these lovely shaped and beautifully decorated eggs to munch on. Now, the other place in which we find the ritual adornment happens at Halloween. Okay, and this is, of course, when you have the autumn time harvest rituals. And Halloween represents the last harvest or the last ritual of harvest time. And we have the same thing happening where these little sugar skulls, which don't look terribly different to eggs, I must say, they're not terribly different in shape, except they're meant to represent a human skull. We do the same thing to them. We adorn them. We decorate them. And, of course, there's various extrapolations of this. There's so many different sugar skull prints, which are very popular in fashion now. And also at Halloween, it's lovely to decorate your face with the sugar skull imagery. But where that imagery and stuff originates from is this practice of molding sugar into the shapes of skulls and then decorating them with all different colors to engage in a ritual practice of decoration and adornment. The whole act of decoration and adornment is part of the ritual. You know, I remember when I was a little kid decorating the Christmas tree with my mum, and it really was part of the ritual of Christmas was the decoration of the tree, not just, you know, opening the presents on Christmas morning. Now, another part that's interesting, and you want to have a look at this because these are edible. Again, look at the eggs. They're adorned. They're edible. These are sugar skulls. They're adorned. They're edible. I probably wouldn't eat the jewels on this one, but these are technically edible things that you're supposed to be feasting on. And, of course, feasting is part of Christmas, part of Easter, and part of most religious holidays, really. It's always some kind of feast that goes along to celebrate it. But ritual feasting, again, is something that comes up and that goes on, and that's happening at this time of year. Some people are feasting on meat. Some people are feasting on human meat through rituals. And this is a time of year as well where the whole eating of the egg is actually symbolic of the eating of the young, the innocent. Of course, there is no more obvious symbol of youth than the egg, because from the egg hatches that which grows. So the eating of the egg is symbolic of eating of the child or eating of children, which is very commonly done around these rituals, particularly in the month of April. This is various pictures of traditional ritual feasts that go on. And in fact, you can see the purple room of the feast hall, which of course carried on in, we've spoken about in previous Dragonologies. And then of course, the whole ritualized feasting, people think it's a pagan thing, and, you know, munching on this and that is, you know, it's a pagan thing. But it's actually not really, because if you start to look at Christianized rituals such as the Last Supper, which is one of the most famous feasts ever depicted, and this is the Leonardo da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci. Was it Michelangelo? I can't remember. No, this is Da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper. And you'll notice wine and bread on the table. This is where Jesus says, no, the wine represents my blood, the bread represents my body. And this is where you get the ritual of the Eucharist, where you go to church and you take Holy Communion, and they give you bread and they give you wine. And you symbolically eating the flesh of Jesus and drinking his blood. So this whole consuming of the sacrificial votive, because Jesus was sacrificed on the cross, is again represented symbolically in the allegory with regards to the sacrificial lamb, because Jesus was thought of as the sacrificial lamb. Again, you'll notice Holy Grail, catching the blood of the lamb, just as the cup caught the blood of Christ. You'll notice a halo around the sacrificial lamb. And of course, the sacrificial lamb represents the substitute, the scapegoat, that which gets substituted instead of. And of course, the substitute or the suppositio or the supposition all ties into Dragonology. And this is from the Ghent altarpiece. It's a beautiful artwork. And this sacrificial lamb comes up a lot in Christianic and Judaic mythology. But often it's that which you also end up consuming at these feasts. They would, you know, cook them and feast on them as opposed to just wasting them. So the sacrificial votive became part of the feast. It's the consumption again. As I said, the eating of Easter eggs actually represents the consumption of a sacrifice, which again, you really want to be participating in these rituals when that's what it represents. Here again is one more extension of just how the whole Easter tradition is actually symbolic of ritual sacrifice. And of course, one of the little things that come up, the cute little symbolic motifs that come up around Easter time is the Easter bunny, also known as the Easter hare. It was the Easter hare before it became the Easter bunny. Bunny is a very westernized version of hare. But the Anglo-Saxon version, of course, looked more like this in its day, and it's become modernized and taken on various interpretations. But commonly, the Easter bunny is depicted with, yes, of course, eggs. Now, bunnies don't lay eggs. They're marsupials and mammals, for that matter, so they give birth from inside out. They don't actually lay their eggs outside of them. But yet, they are commonly depicted with eggs. You know, so again, out of context. Why are they out of context? What is this representing? Well, as we spoke about the consumption of babies and children, sacrifice is very commonly tied into, at this time of year, particularly with the Judaic traditions of Passover or Pesach, tied into the sacrificing of the firstborn, okay? Now, the firstborn is normally the heir, particularly the firstborn son is the heir. And the word heir in this context, hare, is very similar to this word, hair. In fact, they're very difficult to say apart except for the way you pronounce it. Hare and heir, they're etymologically cognizant with each other. And then, of course, there's this interesting depiction, which is a depiction of Father Time. Again, here we go, with wings, with his scythe or skith, whatever you want to call that. There's the time, sands of time over here in this image. And this is the Weeping Virgin. And basically, Father Time is cutting the Virgin's hair. That's why do you think he's fondling with the hair? It's going to be cutting of the hair. And the cutting of the hair represents the sacrifice of the firstborn heir, okay? Because the words hair and heir, if you have a look, all right, hair, heir, and hair are etymologically cognizant with each other. And sacrifice can be found in almost all cultures as part of dragon worship. And these three things, again, are representative of symbolic sacrifice. But why the firstborn is interesting is because it's a time of year which represents the sacrificing of the firstborn ties into Judaic mythology as the time of year known as Passover or Pesach, which is an important biblically derived Jewish holiday. This is when the Jewish people celebrate Passover, or the commemoration of the liberation by God from slavery in Egypt and their freedom as a nation under the leadership of Passover, which is a spring festival. Sorry, it was the leadership of Moses. And Passover is a spring festival, celebrated around the same time of year as Easter. And it's interesting because here we talk about, again, the first fruits, the firstborn. This is when the first fruits or the first fruits of the barley were offered at the temple as part of the sacrifice, okay? In spring, again, the first fruits are offered as part of the ritual sacrifice. We've dealt with this in previous Dragonologies. But what it's got to do with, again, is the cycles of the sun, harvest time rituals, all of it involving elements of sacrifice, the sacrificial votive often consumed. And of course, that is what the egg represents and why we eat the Easter eggs. Despite the fact that maybe chocolatey and yummy, we eat them for the ritual purposes, and we don't even know this, is that it's really all comes down to rituals and sacrifice. Ritual Easter egg feasting. Eggs are symbolic of fertility and sacrifice, okay, as we have explained. That is it. Eggs are ritualistically symbolic. They tie into Dragonology in a million different ways, from a million different allegories, from many different symbols, for example, the snake and the bird. And of course, the egg of creation, the mundane egg. But most commonly, They are in fact a fertility symbol and a symbol of sacrifice, because many young children are sacrificed around this time of year and of course are eaten in ritual feasting. And the act of eating Easter eggs is of course symbolic of ritual feasting on a sacrificial votive, that which was given as a votive, a devotive act through the act of sacrifice. Very, very sick and sad, but this is what we think we're doing whilst we playfully, feeding our children Easter eggs, is we're encouraging them to feast on sacrificial votive symbols. And this brings up the whole question of to engage in ritual or not to engage in ritual. That is the question. And what I do want to say is that whether or not you choose to participate in Christmas or choose to participate in Easter, I do not judge you for it. I do think there is something to acknowledging the cycles. And if you want to acknowledge them on the equinoxes or the solstices, and you want to go about doing that and have some kind of acknowledgement of the sun, appreciation of nature, that's fine. I think in its original context, that's still okay. You want to acknowledge the seasons and their cycles, then do that. But acknowledge them for what they are. Don't be hidden behind sort of idealized versions of what Christmas and Easter is. Know the truth behind what these symbols really are and what it is you're actually participating in and what it is you're getting your kids to participate in by eating these rituals. I mean, it's pretty sad when you see pictures like this. It actually, it's no longer cute. It just kind of sickens me to my stomach because these kids are, feasting on sacrificial votives. Anyway, that's what it's symbolic of when you feast on eggs. So you really have to question yourself about, when are we trying to create a new world? Do we want to continue these rituals which are indicative of human sacrifice? Well, it's touch and go because, as we say, this is a seasonal ritual which follows and acknowledges the seasons, and spring is a great thing to acknowledge. Everyone loves it when it starts to get a bit warmer. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to be engaging in munching on sacrificial votives, which I think is actually very dark in all its aspects, to be honest with you. So that's it for tonight. If you've missed anything, this show or any others on Conscious Consumer Network, please do check out the archives, which are available at our specially dedicated archive website, ccn.media. Dragonology Seasons 1 and 2 are available on the Dragonology website. That's dragonology.info. So please do go check out the previous seasons of Dragonology if you have missed any of the episodes. As I said, the Dragonology book is available on dragonology.info. Feel free to go there and download a copy for yourself. You get a €5 discount. So instead of being €25 as advertised on the website, use the €5 discount code, which is Dragonology S3. That's Dragonology S for season 3. So use this discount code and get a copy of Dragonology for only €20. It's book 1 Spellbreaker, available on the dragonology.info website. Everything, of course, that we do here at CCN is listed on the broadcast guide, so please do check it out. It is updated weekly. And we ask you, of course, to please support the Network Support Fund. CCN is a publicly funded network, and we need you guys to help keep this network on the air. And of course, check out the website where you can find where to join us live, broadcast guide listed, and of course, where to support us if you wish to donate to any of our funding campaigns. The broadcast guide is, of course, also listed on the homepage and all the latest articles down the side. So do check that out. As always, we thank you for supporting free and independent media. My name is Melvi, and we'll be with you again. Take care.